Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcavage. We're back for another edition of the Thyroid Answers podcast, and today we have another guest. It's a good friend of mine. Um, his name is Roland Pankewich. He is a high performance health specialist, and you may be saying, "What the heck does that even mean?" And why are we talking to him on the Thyroid Answers podcast? Well, Roland is a guy I met a number of years ago. He helps a lot of uh, high performance athletic type people and others, and I'll let him get into that in a second. But we oftentimes look at what's going on with cell physiology from the same perspective. I think we both tend to agree that what we often see in human physiology and chronic illness isn't often this broken physiology, at least at the onset, but more of adaptive responses to some type of excessive stress response. So we typically always have good conversations offline. I decided maybe it would be a great conversation to have online. So I want to introduce it to you, Roland Pankewich. How are you today?
Dude, I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me, and thanks for that awesome intro. I feel honored to make it in the good friend category. Like that's a win in and of itself, not just the friend category, the good friend category. And yeah, I'm glad that we finally get to do this in a dialogue where other people can be part of it because I can't tell you how many times we've gotten together over a conference or just, I've been up in Pennsylvania. We've been setting deer traps and we've been talking about the mechanisms of what's going on inside biochemistry. And the thing that I found really resonated with what you do is you are someone else who sees all the patterns. And when I say all the patterns, I mean, there's things we don't know, tons we don't know. But it's a perspective that I've not seen very often in this health space. And I almost said alternative health space, but I'm going to call it a health space where yeah, I think you and I align on so much, but the perspective is, nothing's by accident, nothing's a wrong decision. How can we assess what we're seeing so that we can integrate that into practical applications to help someone get their way out of whatever they're dealing with? Because, whatever the diagnosis is, everything under the surface is what creates that. So how can we reverse engineer it and get that person back to a state of health? And, the cell danger response we've connected on, patterns of blood work and biochemistry. I'm so really excited to have this conversation today to dig into that.
Yeah, we're going to get into all that and more, but let's first give the listeners a little bit of, can you give the listeners a little bit of background, how you get into this space of working with high performance people, athletes? So what's the background? How'd you get into that space?
Yeah, I've had a very unique story where I actually never thought I'd find myself here. Actually, at one point, I said I was never going to do clinical practice when I was in nutrition school, and how wrong I was. I started in the exercise world. So I was fascinated by exercise and performance at a young age. And I started training 13-year-old athletes at the age of 16 without a certification in personal training, just because I just wanted to be in the thick of the action. And I probably was borderline child abuse because of what I made those poor kids do. And that really made me have my own fire get caught regarding athletics. And I started doing competitive, amateur, and professional martial arts for a while, which is not a good career path, let me tell you. But it does teach you a lot about yourself in terms of discipline, grit, resolve, dedication to something. And while I was doing that, I was fascinated how I could get a competitive edge. So it started with understanding exercise from a mechanics perspective. I got into the world of exercise mechanics professionally, started studying with a gentleman named Tom Purvis. He's in Oklahoma City. He kind of created this field of exercise mechanics as we know it now. And then while I was doing that, I was thinking, well, what I eat probably matters. So I started researching, how can I improve my diet to enhance my performance, to help my recovery? Because the one thing I always said to myself is someone can be more skilled than me, but I'm going to be more prepared. I'm going to outwork everyone else. So it gives me a greater chance at victory. And in the sport of martial arts, losing has some dire consequences when it's full contact, right? As you know, from your exercise and wrestling background.
Yep.
And then from there, I was moving along in the exercise industry, studying it at what's called the mastery level. And I was about to launch a gym in the city of Toronto. I'm Canadian by birth. And all of a sudden, life changed. The gym got rezoned by the city, and I was a week away from launching it. I put all my eggs in that basket, and life blew up. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but my then girlfriend at the time said to me, why don't you just become a nutritionist? Everyone asks you advice anyways. Those aha moments when you just
Mhm.
like the world stops. I even remember I was in my kitchen, my phone was to my face. I went, yeah, that's a good idea. And I remember I started looking at a bunch of schools, decided upon one just by feel. A week later, the founder of the school becomes my client at the gym I'm working with, absolute happenstance, if you believe in such things as coincidences. And 6 months later, while I was studying, his wife came up to me and said, Roland, I know what courses you're going to teach me when you graduate. And I was like dumbfounded because I'm not the best student in terms of, discipline being told what to do, but I do my own thing. So I thought, how the hell am I going to teach? That led me to teaching. And I started teaching one, ended up teaching 4 courses. Then I got, scouted by a company to help them build out their education arm for a supplement company in Canada, which led me to podcasting, studying functional medicine. That led me to being mentored by the founder of Health Optimization, traveling around the world, learning the allopathic side of medicine, but also the nutritional intervention, interventional endocrinology. And then from there, I got connected with a really awesome guy who's become a great friend, who's one of the top, if not the top strength coach in the NHL. And he had a bunch of guys that needed help, and he didn't figure out, or rather, he didn't know how to figure out who could work with him. And I got brought in one, which he got another and another. And through making great connections and hopefully performing great service, I've built up quite a great network and reputation in the industry that I'm in, which is very, very niche. I don't have a lot of clients, but I deal with high performance people who are not diagnosed with any kind of illness, but who want to get better and then perform at the highest possible level and sustain that for as long as they wish. That's what I kind of do. That was my journey.
And so now we're here and we're having a conversation. So one of the things I think would be a good place to start is to have this conversation about health, because you're working with clients to maybe improve their health or optimize their health. But how do we define, or how do you define what that is? My issue is that we've got people in the medical community talking about health. We have people in the functional medicine space talking about health and what health is. But how do we measure it? How do we define it? How do we assess it? How do you explain what, because it's this thing out in the thing that we say, right? But
Yep.
how do we define it? I had somebody on the podcast who talks about their product is for health and longevity. So I said, okay, tell me what your definition of health is. And he didn't really want to give me an answer. And I'm like, well, if you're the guru on health and longevity, you got to have a good, how are we measuring it? And he didn't want to get into that. How do you assess it? How do you evaluate it? How do you give some take on it?
We throw around these terms that I think the biggest thing that I want to communicate before I even give you mine is, if we use a term, we have to assume that the other person understands that term as we promote it, right? So if you're on a stage and you're talking about health and there's 150 people in the audience, if you say the word health and then move on to the next part of your statement, you're assuming that everyone understands the word that you're saying in the same way that you do. That's the first issue. And the second issue is this concept of mutual mystification, where like two ships in the night pass, where people are using common terms in conversation, but neither has identified the definition in the other. Yet they have a full conversation about something. So a lot of it is just useless flapping, unfortunately. Currently, my best way of defining health as I see it, and I'll say I can't define health from a functional medicine test or from a blood biochemistry panel. I can define that that's the absence of disease, right? So if there's no imbalance and we're looking at numbers that are solid and good, I'm going to say this person is not ill. So that's the first part of my definition of health. It's got to be the absence of disease. But then there's more to it, because then you have to look at what underpins health. And I think the two major mechanisms of the yin and yang of the body are anabolic and catabolic activity, right? You want to have periods of time where you can be highly anabolic. That's from age zero to probably age 25 if someone's lucky nowadays. That's your area of accumulating resources, right? You're growing, you're maximizing your metabolic power, your endocrine output, your profile of anabolic hormones are at their peak. And then the drop off begins, unfortunately, after that. So then we move to a catabolic phase. So we have to understand that building up and breaking down, I think, is the essence of the most fundamental aspects of governing health inside the body. And the third element is defining the life cycle for the person. So it's the absence of disease, the balance of anabolic and catabolic activity, given the life cycle of the organism, which allows you to contextually give a 60-year-old a slightly different consideration than you will a 20-year-old, because at 20 and 60, your body's doing very, very different things. And if you look at the research into autonomic regulation, you know, the default parasympathetic activity, because I look at the term adaptability is the one word that I would use as a synonym for health. And I look at the autonomic nervous system a lot because if someone has no parasympathetic activity that we can measure, they're in catabolic dominance. They're in sympathetic dominance, which is breaking them down and taking away from their vitality and lifespan and ultimately health span. Because I don't care if I'm 95, if I'm in a wheelchair and someone's changing my diaper. I want to be 80 and walking and being able to drive my own car. So when I look at health, I know I can't objectively measure all of that, but I can create a definition to then compare lab tests and various assessments to the subjective definition that I have to see if it's not there. An example would be if I have an athlete, I do have an athlete who has Hashimoto's. We've talked about this. Stud. He's an absolute amazing human being in his given sport, but he has an autoimmune condition, thyroid condition specifically. So his health is compromised by that because that's causing an imbalance between his anabolic and catabolic activities. So that's how I look at it. It's a working definition that I'm sure will grow, but I feel I have a pretty strong starting point. I'd actually love to get your feedback on what my definition is.
Yeah, I think I think you have to take in those things into consideration. And I don't think it's a thing, right? When we talk about health, health's the
Mhm.
spectrum. You can have extremely poor health or you can have extremely good health. And oftentimes we're defining it by opinion, our personal opinion, well, and
Mhm.
comparison, right? We're saying, hey, these limited labs we ran are within this reference range, so therefore you're healthy. And that would be like saying, okay, you didn't fail the test, but you got a D minus, so you did great in the
You
class. Well,
squeaked by.
right. And so we can't use labs on their own, right? We just can't look at them by themselves as a determining factor because we're not running labs, thorough labs in a general model. We're not running a lot of the labs that really tell us what's going on with the physiology. Labs a lab value on a standalone doesn't tell us much because we have no story to go with it. We have no pattern to assess. So I think the idea of adaptability becomes really important. And it's one of the ones we put in the thyroid debacle is, having that ability to a certain level, I call it fitness, health, whatever, certain
Mhm.
level of fitness to be able to adapt, self-manage, survive, and thrive in your given environment. And so it's still not the best definition, but to me, if you can go out in any environment without medication, right, and be able to thrive, be able to do the workload that's asked of you, that's a state of a higher level of health and wellness, right? If you say, but I'm healthy, but I have to take my blood pressure medication and my thyroid medication and this medication, you have a level of health, but that's not a high level of health, right? So you're in a average or below average state of health. Because if I put you out in the wilderness without those things, you may not survive. So I think it's one of the things that especially us in a functional medicine space, have to continue to work towards clarity as to what uh, what determines poor health, average health, in a high state of health. I don't think anybody has perfect health because we're all in this wax and wane under stress at times. But I think we need to do a better job of being able to put that into a situation where somebody can understand it, because most people just compare their health by, hey, I had these three things done on my general practitioner. They were all within the reference range. Um, and they said, I'm healthy, but I'm obese and overweight. I don't sleep well at night. I've got all these other issues going on. And I think people get confused as to what health is. And then when they do have signs and symptoms, they assume that signs and symptoms often mean that is unhealthy, when signs and symptoms sometimes are the result of adaptive changes, as we talked about. That it doesn't necessarily mean we're unhealthy. It just means the body is adapting appropriately many times to the stressors in our environment. So I think your definition is better than what I've heard. I think yours and mine need to improve, but the definition of
Always.
health that I don't think is very good is health is a state of physical, mental, and emotional well-being. And then, because then you go, okay, well, what's
What's
well-being?
well-being?
Well, then if you look at the definitions in the dictionary, those, health is the state of all these aspects of well-being, and then what's well-being? A higher state is a state of health. Okay, well, I
It's a
still don't
snake
know what it
chasing its
is.
tail. You
Yeah.
know, it's
So,
yeah. But I wanted to
so
add one more thing, if I could too, because
mhm,
we in this industry want to reduce things down to their base fractions when some things just can simply not be. Like you're never going to take a word and have a synonym that represents the absolute objective definition of health, because there are other things that I do, from the exercise world. I look at body composition. So someone could be told that they're healthy, but if, as you said, if they're obese, that's a problem. I look at, does the body have an appropriate response to a stress that I expect the outcome to be? And those are little additional things that I check off. Can someone build muscle without losing muscle in between workouts? Can someone digest anything? Does a piece of gluten put them out for a week, even though they have no actual issues? So I don't think we're ever going to get to one agreed upon definition that encompasses everything without it being a short paragraph. But what I do believe that I hope people take away from this is try to get out of the reductionism and make it something that we can all agree upon that's a blurb. Be accountable to expanding your perspectives in a non-verbal way to include more insights that don't necessarily have to all line up, but they're little check marks that you can make for yourself when you're assessing either a client or yourself as an individual when it comes to your health status.
yeah, and I think it's helpful too if we we talk about the different aspects of health in the thyroid debacle, and we've had this conversation about what I call the fitness factors. Each of these components contribute to health. So if you, I would look at somebody who's got a higher state of emotional fitness, which is one of those fitness factors. If somebody has a bad event happen to them, car stolen, whatever it is, dog died, how quickly can you turn that negative experience into a positive and move past, right? I don't want to forget my family member who passed away, but do I live in grief for the rest of my life, or do I take that and be able to turn that into a positive experience where, hey, they died, I love them, they brought me so many great movement moments in my life, and I'm going to continue to think of them positively versus I can't go on without this person. I'm never and going down into a state of decline. So I think there's a lot of different pieces that we have to look at when we're talking about how do we establish that this person's in a higher state of health versus a lower state of health. What are the criteria in some that you look at in somebody to determine overall, where is this person on that health scale or that health continuum?
Yeah, so the things that I'll do is I will create a series of battery of tests for the average person who's willing to go there, where I like to map the autonomic nervous system first and foremost. And I like to use what's called true HRV, where you're using a chest strap. And I have a program, it's called Nerve Express. I think it's the best algorithms that actually explain how to plot someone's autonomic balance between parasympathetic and sympathetic given different challenges. And, sampling anything one time is going to get you something that day. So I try to do at least a week-long sample to look at the trend of heart rate variability. Because if I see what they expose themselves to in a week and the patterns of adaptation, coming back to that word, it even works for your emotional, you know, turmoil response there. If the adaptability of the person is as expected, I can go, well, this person has some gas in the tank and they also have a really well functioning operating system. Step one, I know that they can deal with stresses and come back to a point of homeostasis. The second thing I'll do is a really complex blood panel. Why? I want to look at all the ratios between various things. I want to look at the pattern of, is there an inflammatory issue? Is there an issue with the immune system? Is there an endocrine issue that we need to be aware of? And I look at that as more of a pathology screen. So I'm ruling out that there's anything that could be problematic because in my mind, we start in this point of homeostasis. Each person has their own unique homeostatic makeup. And then when stress is excessive, adaptability starts to go down and we experience an imbalance. And then if that imbalance is remaining but getting worse because of the stress, we then manifest a symptom. And then if that symptom's left either unchecked or able to fester and develop in and of itself, we develop a pathology. And then by the time we're at a pathology, we're slowly getting to know our new disease du jour, and it's getting ceremoniously diagnosed by a medical professional. And that's when you're typically in the system trying to manage your symptoms with pharmacology and pharmaceuticals. So I run a comprehensive blood panel that allows me to rule out any issues. And then I will do some more functional lab testing, either if the client desires, which typically come in as a stool analysis if there's thought that I need to look at the gut, because the gut, as we've spoken about, is so important as an entry point to the rest of the body. And then if they want to do a micronutrient analysis to see if there's any nutritional deficiencies, I might run something like a Nutri-Eval from Genova. And that's typically how I start, where I'm looking at those patterns of where's their adaptability, are there any imbalances that I can see? And if there's nothing there, then we create a plan for optimizing, quote unquote, whatever it is they want to accomplish. And then there's regular assessment of that ongoingly to make sure that what I'm telling them to do is actually yielding the outcome we want, rather than saying, oh, I feel good. I don't feel good because that's not enough for me.
So let me back you up because some people may or may, we've talked about HRV on the podcast, but I'm sure there's people that are listening and go, I don't even know what HRV is. So can you give us some explanation of HRV, what it is? And then I want to kind of get into the wearables and the technology and where you see pluses, where you see minuses with some of the stuff that's out there. So what is HRV?
So the term heart rate variability, and not many people know this, the only reason it's called heart rate variability is because the most original tool of tracking only looked at the time difference between each individual heartbeat. So it was the variable time differences between heartbeats. So that's what the name has stuck because it's HRV is a nice little acronym. But what you're actually looking at is the time differences between what are called the RR waves of the heart rhythms. And how that works is your heart will beat at a different time stamp every single beat. So your heart is not meant to be a metronome. When someone says, oh, I have a pulse of 60 beats per minute, not every beat is exactly the same amount of time in between as every other beat. And why that's good is the variability in the wave of heartbeats indicates that there's variability in adaptation of the nervous system. So, we hear these things, oh, we don't want to be sympathetic, we want to be parasympathetic. So when someone says that to me, I know what they're actually trying to say. We want to be less stressed and more rested. But if you're purely parasympathetic, then you are one with a couch. You have no ability to exert any stress because you are a jellyfish, because you're exhausted. So what we want that rhythm of breathing in as sympathetic, breathing out as parasympathetic. The body is handing the hot potato back and forth between the two branches of the autonomic nervous system because that's how it regulates organ, tissue, and cellular function most energetically efficiently. So we don't want our brain and our spinal cords and our central nervous system using hormones to direct actions. The autonomic nervous system signals organs to function appropriately through the release of neurotransmitters, which is a very quick and energy efficient process because the body doesn't want to waste a lot of energy doing things. So when someone has the ability to do this, and they both have a strong sympathetic and parasympathetic representation in the nervous system, they have good heart rate variability. Fundamentally, they have a higher HRV than someone who doesn't. If someone is stressed, that variability, which is kind of like water waves in the ocean rolling, becomes more like a flat tabletop. There is no time between heartbeats. So the nervous system is stuck in regulation without adaptability or without adaptation. So typically speaking, someone can get stuck on the sympathetic side, which means they're riding the cortisol train and they're in a highly stressed state. And unfortunately, for most people, that's considered their normal, so they don't know anything any different. And when someone tells that person to relax, they can sit in a room only if they light the room on fire to feel comfortable. They're stress-seeking individuals that are high functioning, but also high stress, typically promoted to burnout. People on the other end that are overly parasympathetic, these are people who will watch, 8 hours of Netflix and just binge and lie there and eat. Why? Because typically speaking, when you get so parasympathetically dominant, you've reached burnout. So it typically goes, I'm stuck in sympathetic, I'm going to push, 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 and then flatten. I am burnt out, I can't move, I need to recover. So that's the typical way someone goes. If someone's healthy, they don't ever need to ride those strict lines on the railway, if you will. They can switch back and forth between both tracks effortlessly and efficiently.
Yeah, so I think it goes back to our definition of health, right? How adaptable somebody is. And for the listener, like just think of it like people. Everybody knows that person who, hey, you want to do this? Yeah, sure. Do you want to do this? Yeah, sure. Hey, we're going to go do this now. Yeah, let's do it, right? Pretty adaptable to almost any situation you put them in. Whereas you have somebody else and you say, hey, I know we were going to do this, but let's do this instead. They're like, I'm not doing that. That's not what I want to do. And they get bent out of shape about it, right? We want the immune system or the nervous system to be able to help us shift gears, adapt to whatever's in front of us, and then not have a prolonged response to it. When the stressor is gone that challenged us, we want to be able to go right back to this, what we talk about it as a homeostatic state. So there are some devices that are out there. You talked about a chest strap and true HRV. But today we've got wearables, we've got Aura rings, we've got BioStraps, we've got Whoop straps, we've got Apple Watches, we've got all these devices that say they have HRV to them. My opinion on them is they're not fantastic, but they give, to some degree, for somebody, gives them some indication of what's going on. But it's not unusual if somebody says, well, I wear my Aura ring, I have my Apple Watch, and I got my Whoop strap, and I get different data from all of them. So what are some of the devices that you think, what do you think of the accuracy of some of these wearable devices? And if they aren't as accurate as some people believe, can we still use these as a tool, even though they're not overly accurate?
So the short answer is yes, you can always use them as a tool.
Mm-hmm.
The analogy I'll use is, you can turn a screwdriver around and hammer a nail in with the back end of a screwdriver. It's not as good as a hammer. I would say that kind of explains what these devices do. So anything that you wear on your finger or on your wrist, you're taking your pulse, right? And the reason heart rate variability has a definitive scientific valid measurement is because what a chest strap does is it measures the frequency. There's an actual oscillating frequency that comes off of the heart. Most people don't know that the heart has its own nervous system. There's 40,000 neutrino cells near the synatrial node, but the synatrial node is giving off its own signature of resonance, if you will. So when you're measuring the different bandwidths of frequencies, you have high frequency, which is the parasympathetic vagus nerve innervation. You have low frequency, which is a little wider bandwidth. This is typically your sympathetic innervation division. And then very low frequency, there's no actual agreed consensus, but a lot of people will say that very low frequency is kind of like your backup systems. So I look at like the HPA axis as the backup system to the autonomic nervous system when, pardon my language, when shit goes down. I don't know if I can swear, but I did.
You can say anything you want.
There we go. So when you're using a wearable device like an Aura ring or a Whoop or an Apple Watch, how are you measuring the frequencies coming off the chest? You're not. You're measuring your pulse, and then each device has its own algorithm of taking the data of your heart rate and converting it into something that they call HRV, which is why you get three different measures of value. So if you compare them against each other, it's the most useless thing you can do, because comparing HRV against anyone else is also useless, because someone's like, oh, I have an HRV of 42 and I'm at 51. What does that mean?
Mhm.
Unless you get a definition for what that means, it's kind of useless to compare it to anything else other than yourself. So generally speaking, what I suggest that people do if they have the wearables, you look at the trend over time, right? So if the trend is going up because you've engaged in a supplement plan with a functional medicine doctor, you've changed your diet, you've modified your exercise routine, and you're sleeping better, that is a safe assumption that that person is getting greater adaptability on their autonomic nervous system. So then we can say, well, oh, there's that word adaptability. They're probably getting healthier, right? If it's going down, and it's a short-term thing. Let's say you did, 3 hard days in the gym with 3 hard days at work, and your HRVs dropped. That's normal. And if after 3 days of recovery it goes back up, that pattern is good. If your HRV is continuing to drop no matter what you're doing, that's when the alarm should sound, because something is taking away your adaptability. So I don't think people should get caught up on the numbers. The only value or variable that's a value when it comes to tracking these numbers is something called the RMSSD. It's an absolute nightmare to say root mean square standard deviation. So it's like taking all the beats and then getting the number that represents how much variability is there. And the higher it is, generally, the better, the lower, the worse. But it's understanding, like we've talked about, it's the patterns of the physiology and the adaptive physiology. If you're stressed, it goes down. That's normal. And someone sees it go down, like, oh my God, my HRV is dropping. This is bad. Like, dude, you just ran a half marathon. Chill. It's going to take a while, but it'll go back up. So it's understanding those devices. But if you really want to get good HRV, it's about how you collect the data. It's about how you represent the data and what you don't do with the data, which is compare it to anyone else's. Because like, who's got a better heart, Eric, you or me? Physical heart. Exactly.
We
It's a
don't
stupid
know.
question.
Right.
It's a stupid question to ask. So that's as useful as it's saying, well, whose HRV is better? Well, it's
Yeah.
unique to
So,
you. What's your history?
yeah. So for the listener, like if you have an aura ring, you're, if I'm going to summarize what Roland said is use it as the guide. Look at the trend. Trend is going down. Then you start to say, okay, what did I do in the last day or two? What was my diet? What was my sleep habits? What was my pattern? Can I justify this? Not as something that's broken, but this is the adaptive change. I did something aggressive and it went down. And if it was just a one-off, then in a short period of time, I should see that go back up again, meaning, hey, I'm getting back to my baseline. If you're if you see it, if you see the trend is continuing to go down and you have no obvious things to justify it that you're aware of, that's when you start to take a look and say, okay, what else is going on with my physiology that I'm losing this recovery, this adaptability, and seeing it go down. And many times, you can look at a lot of times people don't know there's even HRV on like their Apple Watch, but you can look at their HRV on there and say, hey, let's pull that up and they will say, hey, I just got this condition two 2 weeks ago. I got diagnosed. Okay, let me see your Apple Watch data, and let's go back and look at your HRV. And you can go back and see, hey, 4 months ago you were here, and then you started this downward slide. Tell me what was going on 4 months ago, and then I can give you a better understanding of how you got here. You got the diagnosis because of a developing condition. You didn't get sick when you got diagnosed. This was something, the load, excessive load, loss of adaptability, and that is where it got you to where you're at. So they can be used as a tool, but I agree, they're not perfectly accurate. They're better than maybe nothing, but don't, when you're looking at, hey, I have my Apple Watch doesn't compare to my Aura Ring, which one is better? Pick one is usually what I tell patients. Pick one and
Pick the
stick with
one.
one versus, because if you have two paths you're trying to follow at the same time, you probably don't have a path. So
No, unless you can separate your body and then form it back together when the path rejoins itself.
yeah. And
But
we're
you said
always on
something
and off
really
the
good
path
there.
anyway. Is
Exactly,
that
always. But you said something really wise. It's take the data and then connect it to the story.
Right.
Because the story, like being the Sherlock Holmes of your own health, or if you're a practitioner, the Sherlock Holmes of a client's health, will always allow you to put the pieces together to make the objective data subjectively interpreted. Right.
Right.
So I think that's a really important thing is doing that. And sometimes you can see these outliers. I've had two scenarios with athletes where I had one guy who was watching Netflix in his bed before he went to bed. So I simply got him a pair of blue light blocking glasses. And that night alone, he had the biggest jump in HRV he's had in months. Why? Well, he's not getting bright light in his eyes right before he wants to go to sleep. And another cool
Yeah.
thing is you can use HRV also after you take all of your supplements to see what your body does. If you get a bump in HRV after you take a supplement protocol, well, theoretically, you can extrapolate that that supplement protocol is extending your adaptability beyond what it currently is, theoretically, right?
And
And
the
I've seen that
opposite,
before.
right? And the opposite
Exactly.
could be true as well. You could see a drop in your HRV. And one of those things I point out to clients, and I'll get your input on this, is I'll say when you as you're because I like people to layer on supplementation.
I'm with you.
For those who don't for those who know me, they know that I don't like lots of supplementation.
You don't have
I don't think
24
that's the
bottles you take
strategy.
in the morning, Eric?
No, no. I said I've got somebody in our space who I just got their blood work and their supplement list, and I said this supplementation strategy is like a Jackson Pollock painting. It's like you grabbed everything and just threw it into the body, and are like, okay, that looks is it? It's not, and
Every
expecting it to be good.
anti-inflammatory supplement there is, more sulforaphane, more resveratrol, more NAC, and that's what people do nowadays because they hear it's good, but they don't stop and go, okay, so if this is beneficial in its isolated state, what if I combine it with nine other things? And that's the black box of the body. We don't have that research.
Right.
That's a tangent
So
we won't go down.
yeah, but from a perspective, when we talk about that HRV, if you take a new support product and you see your, let's say it's an antimicrobial, you could see your HRV drop for a few days because taking an antimicrobial might create some die-off response that then triggers a little bit of immune and inflammatory response. So your HRV could go down. Does that mean that it's a problem for you? Well, if there's a drop and then the trend as it starts to come back up after a few days, well, created a change, which is really what we want to see. And now, but it's not a long-term issue. But if you're taking if you add something in and that HRV continues to decline, or it doesn't rebound pretty quickly, then you can look at that and say, okay, even though this is supposed to be healthy for me, it's having a negative impact on my physiology. Is that how you look at it as well?
100%, because we assume that a supplement that has been given to us automatically means it's good for us, or our body is tolerant of it, or it's beneficial, right? The reality of the situation is everything, still with the most rigorous testing, is still at best an educated guess. So that supplement, while may having what the research says a specific effect in the body, in your body it might not be working well. And that's what I like doing, as you said, is tracking the data over time, because if you started a new supplement regime and your HRV is down and the rest of your life is the same, well, pull it out. If it goes back up, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's the issue when it comes to this kind of stuff. And that's why I'm with you. I'm a less is more kind of guy when it comes to creating a supplement plan, because it's like, the best traditional Chinese medicine acupuncturists use one needle, and they solve all their problems with one needle because they look at all the patterns and they figure out what is the root cause origin of this thing. And if I go there, I'm going to make benefits everywhere else, which is wonderful because the autonomic nervous system, as a tool of assessment, controls about 90% of our organ function. And the pattern is, and this is where people have to understand the patterns, if I'm working on my gut, as you said, I took an antimicrobial. If I induce a die-off reaction, what is that going to do systemically? It's going to create a stress response via the killing of things, which is going to cause an inflammatory reaction, which is going to require an endocrine compensation and a raising of the sympathetic system to release cortisol and adrenal hormones. Why? Because my body's under stress. So you need to put all those pieces together when understanding how to interpret this data for people, because most people look at it day by day, but they're not thinking the automatic big picture of all the nodes in the network coming together to make that contextually true or appropriate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'd add to the what you talked about with the supplementation and how it differs. We we have this naivete that because we put something into the body, it's going to respond the way we want it to, as if we're in a state of homeostasis. And I'll get some definitions from you in a second on homeostasis and allostasis. But we assume that if we give something, it's going to work the way we want to because everybody's body's operating from the same homeostatic mode. That's not the case. And the analogy I typically make with somebody is, and it's probably a terrible analogy, but you could make me a great meal. And if I'm in sit down and digest mode, I'm going to eat that meal. But if you make me a fantastic, super healthy meal, but I'm in a fight with somebody for my life, you you might say, well, why is he not eating my meal? I made him a perfect meal. Why would he ignore the meal? Why is he not? And be think that me not eating your super healthy meal was like an issue, right? Why wouldn't you eat it? Why are you being a jerk? Why are you not doing it? Look at all the hard work I put in. But I'm not in eating mode right now. I'm in survival mode. So I'm not going to eat that food. And even if I did, what am I going to take a bite, fight, fight? No. So we have to consider that our cells and tissues at the end of the day get to determine what happens with the micronutrients that we put into the body. Do I want to use that supplement, that micronutrient, to build more proteins and amino acids and hormones and all things that are supportive for the manufacturing mode of the physiology? Or do the cells and tissues need that to support the defense physiology? And if they need it to support the defense physiology, we may not feel so good when we take that if it's contributing to the inflammatory response. And we say, that's bad. It makes me feel bad when I get it. Yeah, but that's the appropriate response because you have a dysbiosis, because you have an infection, right? So you think about, I know you do, but I'll let you put your thoughts in there about that line of thinking.
Well, I mean, it's spot on. I have nothing to say, and you basically said the exact way I look at it. And if we come back to teasing out what's really going on there, it's yin yang, anabolic, catabolic, positive, negative, whatever cliche way you want to look at it. You just have to understand the downstream consequences of the interconnectedness of the human body. And I think the thing that I can add that probably has value is we forget that our body has its own infinite wisdom. It's a little esoteric and out there that's separate from our minds and our conscious thought. And then we have to realize that our minds, at the best of times, occupy about 10% of our waking reality because 90 to 95% of it is going on behind the scenes because it's hardwired habitual existence from all the mental and emotional constructs that we've layered into the context of who we are and our personalities. So when the average person goes, I take this product that should make me feel good and it doesn't, there's probably 3 to 5% of conscious contemplation there of everything that needs to be thought about when we swallow a pill. And I think the unfortunate reality is two scenarios. Either you're forced to look at things the way you and I are because you have something slightly askew and you can't just be satisfied with the status quo. That's what I like that we align on. Or because of you having a series of horrible responses and various traumas, if you want to use that word, you have to start digging deeper and thinking more in terms of the complexity of how things are interconnected, but also thinking more objective and out of your own expectations and biases, how things have to be. And I think that's where you get the best data because it's almost like, oh, if I'm eating and every time I eat, I have a negative response. Well, no one told me about how my body works, but I never realized that I walk around stressed every second of the day. And until I have that realization, the reason why I feel like crap when I eat doesn't make any sense until I have that come to realization moment. of that I'm extremely highly strung, extremely neurotic, and when someone tells me to relax, I want to take their head off. It's probably a clue that I'm not super relaxed right now. So,
Yeah, listen,
it's
I think that's a great point because we think about from a digestive point. You talk to people who have chronic GI and digestive issues, and they wonder, no protocol work, no treatment works. I do it, it feels better for a little bit, and then as soon as I stop taking the support product, I go back to having problems again. And we have to ask that question: how many times are you going to try and manipulate digestion before you realize that there's an overlying governor here that's saying, hey, we're in survival mode, we're not in digestion mode. So no wonder never feel
yeah,
good
the
when you
red
put
light's
food in
going
there,
off
right?
all the time. I even said to you before we started recording that I have a few clients, and I've noticed, and I think this is a really important point that I'd love to make. I think the body's the last place for things to show up. So when a symptom or a disease manifests, that's been brewing under the surface for years. But I think the opposite is true. When someone gets better, for that person to have the overt awareness and sync with their physiology changing for the better, that also takes some time. So some of the clients who have their biggest challenges, some of my entrepreneurial clients, I can do anything I want with their body, but until we work on the emotional mental patterns, nothing gets better. Why? Because they're conserving their worldviews to keep their body in allostasis all the time, to use your terminology. Their day to day existence is so intense, so high performance, and they have unrealistic expectations of the fact that they can't just push the gas pedal through the floor and the car will go faster. So you have to kind of educate people on that, and then when you start to clear up some of the non physical stuff, what I see clinically is you see the supercharge effect that all of a sudden the nervous system gets better, their sleep gets better, their workouts are better, they're less pain, their moods are more stable. Why? Because the physical health is just simply responding to the non physical stuff that's part and parcel of this thing we call the human. Right? It's not just about the best supplement protocol and the most comprehensive tests and the best analyses of the physiologic patterns. It's about the integration of how all of those things really come together, which I mean, I think you only learn by doing and experiencing this stuff with people and taking on different kinds of clients.
So let's do this. Can you give like a definition? Because we've been talking about homeostasis and allostasis. I've
Right.
talked about
Yeah.
before, but maybe let's just define those in simple terms for somebody who's listening, going, "What the heck are they talking about?"
They're using
What's
all these words.
homeostasis? Yeah, and what's allostasis? How do you describe the two things?
So, I mean, I'm trying to, homeostasis is a little bit of a harder one because homeostasis is unique to the individual. I'll say that first. To me, homeostasis is the ability of that person's body to be in its most optimal state of stress adaptation, that equilibrium, right? So, subjectively, what does homeostasis look like for a person? Well, if they have for a while demonstrated consistency in sleep patterns and digestive prowess, in energy levels, in the ability to recover from things. There's no obvious imbalances being manifested. That person is in a state of homeostasis. If they feel generally consistent all the time, and by you assessing what it is their life consists of, if you go, yeah, you sound like you're in a pretty healthy place. You can do whatever you want, whenever you want, within reason. That's a person I would say is in homeostasis. We talked about it before. Oh, I'm going to go rock climb this weekend. Oh, I'm going to go sit down and read a book and relax. They can do the extreme yin and the extreme yang. Allostasis is any specific stressor that pushes that person away from homeostasis. And then it's the total stress load, right? So if you take that same person, if they start increasing the frequency of exercise, that's going to be an allostatic load that may not be okay for them. If they go from eating well to eating poor quality foods, it's going to be another allostatic load with a potential inflammatory response from that. If they go from sleeping 8 hours to 6 hours a night, that's another allostatic load in terms of being under recovered or suboptimal recovery. And if they get in a fight with their significant other and their kid decides to, flunk out of the first semester of college, those are allostatic loads that's going to push that person out of balance. So all of a sudden, that person doesn't have their homeostatic ability to both exert energy and conserve energy. They're stuck in a chronic stress state. And if they're there for too long, that's going to be the development of the process of disease, if you will. And that's where I think most people that come to see us are, unless it's their job to be chronically an allostatic load, i.e., a pro athlete.
Yeah. And so typically one of the things I'll try and make it a simpler definition is homeostasis. You have the ability to give to make the energy do all the things you need to do on a daily basis um, efficiently. Allostasis is when I don't have enough energy to do everything I need to do in the body. So what I have to do is determine what gets priority. So I turn down the energy to certain systems and turn up the energy to other systems. And the analogy I'll give to patients is imagine you have 10 plants that you love, but you don't have enough water to water them all. You've got two choices. You can give all 10 of them less water and they're all probably going to wither, or you're going to make sure those plants that you love the best get watered appropriately and the other ones don't. That's allostasis. I don't have enough water in this situation to water everything, so I'm going to put water to the ones I like the most, and the ones I like the least are going to get the least amount of water. And we all go into this kind of excessive stress on and off. And if tomorrow I have enough water to water all the plants, I water all the plants and everything goes back to normal. Um, if I stay in this situation where I don't have enough energy, I'm not generating enough energy to do all the things I need to do, and I'm constantly down regulating the physiology of certain cells or tissues or functions, at some point, the longer I keep them in that state, they're going to start to break down, dysfunction, which is what we see in the body. I got irritable symptoms in my GI tract. I've got this chronic rash thing, right? We start to see signs and symptoms. From the plant perspective, you start to see it wilt. It doesn't look as healthy. And then I come back, give it some water, and it springs back a little bit, but maybe not so much. But allostasis is how much stress. Allostasis occurs when we have more stress or more energy requirement than we can really achieve, and we have to make considerations and decisions. And then the longer we're in it, that's when we see dysfunction or malfunction, and eventually we see disease, like the plant dies, it just doesn't spring back anymore. So our body's always trying to fight to maintain a level of homeostasis, but when we don't make enough energy to do everything we need to do every day, the systems that are most critical are going to get most of the attention, and the systems that are less critical for survival often get down regulated a little bit, and even inside some of the cells and tissues. So that's how I want it to be kind of easy for my clients to understand that, hey, you think that this is normal. This is allostatic. This is adaptation mode. You're not in homeostasis. You're in adaptation mode. Something's pulling energy and you're not making a lot of energy efficiently. So that's why you have this chronic symptomatology, because these systems are starting to break down because of this excessive stress load. So our job, your job, my job is to find out what's creating that excessive stress load, reduce it or eliminate it to a point where, okay, I've got enough. I can start to balance that energy need versus energy production, and then I can start to get back into position of heal. Most people are throwing supplements and everything else at a system that's not in a healing and recovering and regenerative state. It's still in this kind of fight or flight response. It's still in that fight mode where I'm not eating the meal my bride made me, right? We're in this stuck physiology. So with the time we have left, and you and I could geek out for days, but I want to see if we can talk about two sets of three. We talk about, and you've done a great job of taking some of the things I've talked about in my book, The Thyroid Debacle with Dr. Callie Halderman, and talking about the fitness factors. But in kind of along those lines, what are the key? Because everybody's looking for the organism, the mold, the toxin, the bug that's getting them. But what do you see are three of the biggest movers in improving somebody's overall health and physiology. If you say it's dealing with mold, if it's dealing with Lyme, if it's dealing with parasites, whatever, but what do you see from as a consistent? You've been doing this long enough. What do you see as the big three areas in somebody's overall picture that if you start to improve their level of health and fitness in these categories, you get bigger shifts in improvement of health?
It's just mold. That's it. No, I'm joking. I lied. It might surprise people. My number one is, I would say, these aren't in ranking order, but the three important things. The first one I'm going to talk about is circadian rhythm. Most people have no idea how the body knows when to do what the body does. Think about that for a second. Like, how does your body just know when to release hormones? How does it know when to urge your bowels to move? Like, we just take all these things for granted. And our bodies have these internal clocks, right? So our eyes are not just a camera to see the world around us. Our eyes are actually exposed brain tissue. So, like, take that for what it's worth. But the regulation of light cycles and the consistency of the regulation of light cycles controls our circadian rhythm. So the kind of light we get in the morning stimulates all of our wakefulness, and the suppression or the avoidance of bright lights in the evening allows for that shutdown, recovery, regeneration, sleep to be experienced. Most people are totally out of sync with their circadian rhythm because they wake up in a very dark house, a dark room, and they go through the day spending most of their time inside on a computer screen. We've been taught to fear the sun because, other than humans, everything else seems to tolerate the sun, but humans just die of cancer because of sun exposure. And at nighttime, we put the TV on and we put overhead lights on, and we then just watch TV in bed in some cases. So this dysregulation of light cycle basically dysregulates the clock inside of our heads. And we wonder why people have issues with hormone levels, or why they have issues with dysregulation of not being able to go to sleep at night and waking up feeling exhausted. It's not super exciting or sexy, but if you regulate your circadian rhythm, what our life was like probably 100 years ago, when there really wasn't much opportunity to illuminate our environment other than maybe a fire or a candle, your sleep gets better. Your ability to wake up without the need for caffeine gets easier. The regular exposure to light cycles, by simply going outside for lunch during the day in a nice environment, daytime light exposure correlates with the quality and the depth of sleep at night. So the first thing is, for me, if you don't regulate your circadian rhythm, you're wasting a lot of money on fancy supplements. You know what I mean? That would be the first thing. The second thing would be water quality. Most people take water for granted. And water inside the body is not water inside the glass, right? Like, water in here is just called bulk water. And it's probably random distribution of hydrogen and oxygen molecules, H2O. But if you look at some of the water science and what happens in the human body, water is a medium of conductivity. So we talk about the health of a cell. Inside every cell is a very aqueous environment. It's 90% water. And all the proteins that are operating inside that cell need the water to be free of impurities, need the water to be properly mineralized to conduct electricity. And then when we make energy, or when our mitochondria makes ATP, it also makes infrared light. So that helps to structure water inside the cell, because a lot of people don't realize that water inside your cell, when it's exposed to the right kind of energy, separates its positive and negative charges and starts to act like a battery. So it conducts its own electrical current, because we're beings of electricity. I'm actually reading a book right now called The Body Electric by Dr. Robert O. Becker. It was written in like the late 70s, early 80s, and it was just understanding the electrical conductivity and the nuance of how the human body operates itself. So if you don't have good quality water, if you're drinking tap water, which is unfortunately, yes, it's sterilized for safe municipal consumption, but there's very poor mineral balance in there. There's very little trace mineral content. If you're not drinking good quality water, in addition to drinking a lot of water in plastic bottles, which, inoculates you with microplastics, you don't even realize that simply drinking water is adding to your chemical load, which causes cell stress. So that would be my second thing is find a way to find a way to create the best quality water filtration system that you can afford in your house. Or if you have the ability to do so, hire a service that delivers water in glass jugs. That's what I do. It's the current best scenario that I have. And I have, devices that I use that are biophysics based devices like pulse electromagnetic induction that I lay on these mats that help to stimulate the movement of charges in the body. And I have hydrogen water devices that you can actually help to structure water with. So that's the second thing. And the third thing would be breathing. Learn how to breathe because the new thing is like, oh, we need to be parasympathetic. And that is the most useless piece of general advice to anyone who has no idea what that even means, because it's a very nuanced thing. What I think people should say is if you can learn to recruit your parasympathetic nervous system more often, then you can balance that stimulus recover pattern. And the fastest way to stimulate your autonomic nervous system to recruit parasympathetic, other than lying down and sleeping, is learning how to breathe through your diaphragm. Because we have two outflows for the vagus nerve, right? We have the cranial outflow that basically innervates every single organ on the way down. But do you know the only organ in the body that doesn't have parasympathetic innervation? Do you know what that organ is?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I'm not actually asking you. Sorry, I didn't make that clear.
Yeah, let me know.
The adrenal glands. They only have a sympathetic innervation because they're the stress response glands, right? So think about that for a second. For us to stimulate parasympathetic, we don't have the opposite mechanism of turning on the adrenal glands. We just have the scenario of not turning them on to allow us to relax. So where everything else has its gas and brake pedal in the body, the adrenal glands only have a gas pedal, which kind of makes sense. You want them to be able to respond instantaneously in fractions of a second. So when people learn deep breathing patterns, what you're doing is you're learning how to exist without the need to stimulate the adrenal response in response to a stimulus. And that diaphragmatic breathing is one of the best ways because via a long exhalation, as you know this from the book, that's what allows your breathing cadence to get to a much lower breath per minute cadence. And that long exhalation increases parasympathetic tone when done on a regular basis. So if it's meditation, if it's, walking and being mindful of your breathing pattern when you walk, if it's using some technology like a meditation app, a brain tap, what have you, those three things, which are not, they're no practitioner's favorite pieces of advice because you can't make money off of them. But I don't care because I want people to take the responsibility for learning about these things and implementing them. Because if you have a great practitioner who's helping you with your food, with your supplementation, if you have a great trainer, these things are going to supercharge those effects because they're going to get you out of that allostasis that you mentioned back into a homeostatic state. They're
So we
they're
so we got three big things. We've got balanced cortisol rhythm, improved water quality, improved breathing,
balanced
right?
circadian rhythm.
Balanced
Circadian
circadian
rhythm.
rhythm. Okay.
Yes.
So let's hit on three key things. You kind of did a couple things. What would be three key concepts or tools or strategies for balancing the circadian rhythm?
Perfect. Best thing to do when you wake up in the morning, especially because it's getting into the spring, summer months, go outside, have a glass of water, put your feet on the earth, and just spend a few minutes outside with the light shining in the direction of your face. That light energy, the sun's photons get absorbed by your eyes, get absorbed by your skin, and morning light actually stimulates your body to increase wakefulness and energy without the need for a stimulant. So that's strategy number one. Second thing is get some midday sun. Getting ultraviolet light excessively is not good for your skin, but getting 5 to 15 minutes of midday sun without sunglasses on, without a hat, with as much of your skin exposed as possible, that is energy that your body uses not only to direct activity in the body, but that's how you make vitamin D. It alleviates the need for this massive vitamin D supplementation regime that everyone seems to be undertaking these days. Because unlike a supplement, your body will not make more than it needs. It will kick you out of the sun when it's time.
Yeah, and it is, you already talked about it. You only need about 15 minutes per day. A couple times a week is one of the papers I read to get
Yeah.
appropriate vitamin D production. So if you're like, but I get out in the sun and my vitamin D is still low, that's a whole nother conversation that maybe we'll do another podcast on,
Altogether different
which,
context.
but
Yes.
something different. So give me number three.
Number three is if you can have modified lighting in your house. Like here's an example. I'll turn this bulb on. You can see this bulb has a very yellow hue to it, right? So what I try to do is if I need to illuminate my environment in the evening, I mimic what a sunset does. I have yellow and red and orange lights on. Or get rid of those high efficiency bulbs that everyone puts in their house that are like assaultingly bright and blue. Those are carcinogenic for you. And get yourself a really good pair of blue light blocking glasses if you want to watch TV. Because at the very least, you're blocking the light from coming into your eyes, which is going to be the thing that raises cortisol in the evening. That's the dysregulation. Darkness is the signal for melatonin release. Melatonin release is the initiation of the shutdown process for the body to actually get restful sleep because it's also a very important antioxidant for the brain. You need to get in a deeper stage if you're going to activate your glymphatic system and detoxify the brain properly.
And that to tailor onto that, in your room, night lights, you don't get those. Try and make your room environment as dark. Turn your cell phone off or put it somewhere else, but don't have it, at least don't have it face up where every time you get a text, it's flashing. And if you have the alarm clock that you think you need to get up in the morning, don't have that thing on bright where it's disrupting your sleep. But try and make that environment, especially that sleep environment, as dark as possible.
There are alarm clocks that gradually get more bright so they wake you up naturally. They don't emit a sound, but they start off, half an hour before you wake up very dimly, and then they become very bright to the point where you can't ignore them, but it's not a jolt awake. So those are my
Right.
three circadian rhythm pieces of advice.
All right. Three waters.
Number one, try to get out of plastic bottles altogether. Plastic bottles, especially, you don't know where that water's been sitting, if it's been in a warehouse in South Florida baking in the sun. So anytime you heat plastic, plastic leaches into your water. So if you want to drink plastic, keep buying plastic water bottles. Number two, if you filter your water, filter the water the best possible way you can. So a Brita filter, any of these countertop filters, it's basically a charcoal filter or a charcoal plus. So you might get out some of the chlorine, but you're not going to get out the fluoride or anything else that might be coming in from the municipal water supply. So if you filter it really well with something like a reverse osmosis system or a Berkey or any of these more comprehensive filters, the third thing I would do is add trace minerals back to your water at least once a day. We as humans are so deficient in minerals these days, and I think that's one of the reasons that we have energy problems because you need ions to conduct electrical current. You need that disassociation of positive charge outside the cell and negative charge inside the cell to activate transporters and to balance out the overall net charge of the body. Because if you look at chemistry, when you accumulate hydrogen ions, that's positive charge. And when you accumulate positive charge, that's inflammation. So a lot of the inability to balance that inflammation is from the fact that we have this excessive amount of positive charge and we don't have the ability to activate things getting out of our cells properly because we lack the minerals. And minerals work with water, like look what this planet's mostly covered with. It's salt water. We have mostly salt water on the planet. So sodium is important for water, potassium is important for protein function. So minerals in the water, if you filter it, that would be my third tip there after filtration.
All right. Breathing.
Breathe. Well, I'm gonna take something right out of your book. If you don't breathe through your nose, it's probably time you learned. And if there are issues with anything causing that, be it sleep apnea, excessive, body weight, use that as motivation to get that stuff taken care of because the all-cause mortality risk with faulty breathing and cardiovascular disease, the correlations are incredibly powerful there. Like
Yeah.
not breathing properly, you do not oxygenate your body. If you can't release oxygen, your cells become fermenters. They become anaerobic beings. And an anaerobic being has a very short lifespan. So you start triggering cell replication because there's no oxygen. That's a cell in crisis. That's not cell stress. That's cell crisis. So the first thing is nasal breathing and learning how to properly breathe. This is dovetailing into the second one, breathing through your diaphragm. Most people don't realize that when you're stressed, you breathe through your throat and your chest. So it is a very sympathetically dominant way of breathing because your breathing cadence is actually designed to conserve that stress response. You don't want to chill out when the bear is chasing you. You don't want to be like, dude, I need to breathe a little bit. Just stand 5 feet away from me. Let me relax and we can do this running thing again. It's by design. But for the most part, our lives are containing stresses of our own creation. So unless we learn to break the pattern, neurologically speaking, neurons that fire together, wire together, we have to remember how to breathe like a baby does. That you see a baby's belly expanding, contracting every time they breathe. We lose that as we get older. And I would say the third thing, it may not be necessarily a breathing thing, but if you spend a lot of time indoors, think about the air quality you're breathing. Very few people think about the harboring of airborne pollutants and chemicals. So getting yourself a good HEPA filter and changing that thing on a regular basis and keeping it in the room where you spend your most time. And something simple as opening the windows once or twice a day. The air in the home is still dirtier than the air in the city center because the home is filtering itself out through its own closed loop system. So I would say, from a breathing perspective, breathe through your nose. Once you've mastered that, really learn to breathe diaphragmatically. And it takes regular repetition. Set a reminder on your phone or your Apple Watch to go off every half an hour and take, even if it's 2 minutes, just to breathe, because you'll be incredibly shocked at how much better you feel when you slowly oxygenate your body. Your stress levels go down, the world feels and looks different. The tension in your body might dissipate naturally. And the air that you are breathing, if you have to be indoors to compromise, make it the best possible air that you can.
Yeah, I want to add on to that how important that is. I just had somebody, I talk about breathing with all my clients. Have fill out a questionnaire, give them some basic breathing exercises. And I talk about nose taping, mouth taping at night when they're sleeping. Everybody fights me on it. And
I wonder
have
why.
a yeah, and I have a client who um, we decided this was going to be the primary focus, and we were going to rerun his thyroid and lipid panel um, to see what the impact was. And even though this person was fighting me on that to do it, they committed to it, and significant improvement of T4 to T3 conversion, significant drop in lipids. And so, and they're like, I can't believe how much better I feel. Yeah.
Imagine
And
that. Just
look
from
at
breathing.
look at the dramatic change in your thyroid physiology. And for the listener, how could that impact thyroid physiology? When you breathe improperly, you create hypoxia at the cells. You're not getting enough oxygen off the red blood cells to the tissues. And so they're not getting oxygenated. When you don't have enough oxygen in the tissue or in the cell, that triggers something called hypoxia inducible factor, which is this is dangerous. Hey, we don't have enough oxygen to run an oxygen rich system here. And what do I need to do in that state? I need to downregulate thyroid hormone. Why would you downregulate thyroid hormone? Because thyroid hormone drives more aerobic respiration through the mitochondria. If you don't have enough oxygen to drive that system, then we would need to turn down that system. So if I'm doing that 6-8 hours a night, breathing improperly, creating a hypoxic state, I'm gonna downregulate chronically my thyroid physiology. And what else gets changed is that hypoxia is going to trigger the cell stress, cell danger response, which is going to increase your sympathetic drive, right? Which is going to increase blood sugar physiology. You're going to get more blood sugar pumped out into the system. And what this person also noticed, because they wear a CGM, is my waking blood sugar used to be in the hundreds, and now it's down like 92, right? So instead of being 106, 107, 112 when he'd wake up every morning, it's now 100 and it's down to like 92. And he's like, Why is that? I'm like, because all night when you were breathing improperly, you kept signaling to your brain, I don't have oxygen. And now your body's got to kick in that sympathetic nervous system, which is going to kind of jolt you into out of your sleep pattern so you can again breathe again. But with that comes glucose physiology. You're doing that all night. It's not because you're eating too much carbohydrates, it's because you're activating your sympathetic nervous system. And he was wondering, but why do I have more energy during the day? Well, if you're not constantly waking yourself out of that deeper sleep state, you're able to recover, you're able to build more ATP, you're going to have less adenosine in circulation, you're going to be less tired, you're going to be less fatigued. Everything gets better when you breathe better, right? So
I
it's
want to even
just
add to that, his lipids went down. Your body
Mhm.
can only burn fat in an oxygen-rich state. People don't realize that when you jack up glucose metabolism, you downregulate fat metabolism. So metabolically, you become less efficient, you become less powerful. The fat will yield way more ATP than a molecule of carbohydrates will. So if you're breathing improperly and you're anaerobic, you can only burn glucose. There is no fat burning. It's physiologically impossible. And fats
right.
are a far more effective fuel because you're not tied to then the cortisol response when your blood sugar drops or the craving for sugary foods.
Yeah, and part of that conversation that he and I had, because he's a smart person, and he said thought it was just like an adrenal fatigue issue. I'm like, wait a minute. The adrenal fatigue thing, if you have cell stress going on and it's chronic, low grade cell stress, and you have lower T4 to T3 conversion as part of that cell stress response, your cholesterol was elevated partially from what you said, but the other reason is can't get it out of the bloodstream into the liver to either utilize it or get rid of it. I can't pull it in. And this is what I tried to explain to him. You can't pull it into the adrenal tissue to actually convert it into cortisol. And so the adrenal fatigue is the byproduct of excessive cell stress. And instead of using cortisol in that kind of acute, in that kind of stress state, now you're wholly relying on epinephrine to kind of activate that system. So I'm like, your adrenal physiology will be better as a result of this. So you didn't have adrenal fatigue, you had reduced adrenal production because of the chronic stress, poor breathing response. It's pretty cool because in acute stage, the adrenal gland can make its own cholesterol, but in homeostasis or chronic stress, doesn't. It needs cholesterol from the bloodstream, which means that the cholesterol's got to be pulled out. It has a limited capacity to make its own cortisol, which is pretty important. And one thing I haven't seen it, but I think it's important, especially for thyroid patients. They wonder, hey, why, when I'm in this sympathetic state, why might my thyroid hormone production go down? And it's possible. I don't have any literature on it, but think about this concept of tyrosine steal, where if I'm in stress mode, tyrosine's the base for thyroid hormone. Tyrosine's also the base for my catecholamines. We talked about redistribute. Where does the cell and the body do with certain nutrients, right? If I'm in manufacturing mode, where do I need that tyrosine to be driven towards? I need more of that to be driven towards thyroid gland for thyroid hormone production. If, let's say, we're in chronic stress mode and I need tyrosine, am I using that for my catecholamines, which are going to keep me alive, or do I want to use that for thyroid hormones that support faster, to support all the cellular physiology that I really don't need in the moment, right? So,
Perfect sense to me. In addition, think about this. If I'm in chronic sympathetic dominance and my mitochondria are becoming compromised, they're going to make more free radicals and less ATP. So to save myself, I'm going to turn down the faucet of my energy production power. Why? Because I don't want to rust myself. I don't want to deplete resources. I don't want to compromise my physiology because I can't keep up with the stress demand. So I'm going to make myself become hypothyroid instead. So I'm going to allow myself to be rested or more restful to overwhelm the allostatic load to get back to homeostasis. I mean, nothing in the body is by accident. And I mean, we could talk about these patterns for 2 hours. I hope we do someday. Maybe someone wants to listen to it. I don't know.
Right.
But I
Well,
love this stuff.
it's a great conversation. We I think what I want the takeaway to be from today for the listeners is, in instead of thinking about all the all the sexy stuff that you read on blog posts and supplement things, a couple key things. The foundational things that we need to do to have a higher state of health aren't the sexy thing that blogs or posts are, and crazy supplemental strategies and constantly trying to kill bugs. Before you try and find all these crazy things to do, make sure you're dealing with some of these foundational things, because at the end of the day, you can do all these expensive nutritional therapy support products or formulas or strategies or whatever. If you don't deal with these key components, like your physical fitness, like your water quality, like your breathing, like your circadian rhythms, you don't address these things, there's no way you're going to stay healthy. Doesn't matter. There's not enough supplementation in the world to make those changes. So if you do these things, just focus on these three key things we talked about today, you're going to put yourself in a higher state of health no matter what. Okay. So Roland,
Simplicity is the highest form of sophistication.
yeah, I know you don't, there's no website really for anybody to find you, but if somebody wants to hear more Roland, where can they go to hear more
Gosh.
of your talking?
Well, I mean, you and I both collaborate in conjunction with Master Supplements US Enzymes. So we have actually, I've been doing a monthly webinar on the fitness factors from your book. So I've been trying to do you and Kelly, justice in terms of representing the expanded lectures on those. They're up on YouTube. I mean, I have some interviews up there, but because of what I do and how I do it, I really do like my autonomy because I've realized that my key to health is having that optimal balance between how involved my work is, but also having that time off not to have to manage anything. So, I mean, if someone really wants to get a hold of me, if they have a contact form through you, I'm sure they can find a way to get in contact with
Sure.
me through you if that's an avenue they want to choose. But yeah, I'm kind of a ghost. I don't have social media. I don't have my own website or platform because I'm in a phase where I don't necessarily need to, and I'm really enjoying my time digging into things that no one else wants to read, so I can hopefully do the things that no one else can.
Awesome. So, and for listeners, check out Master Supplements and US Enzymes. Roland does a lot of kind of the educational content for them. There's lots of videos and stuff. Roland, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It was a pleasure having a conversation with you. And for the listeners, share this one with friends and family. I know we didn't get thyroid specific, but we do talk about really things that are imperative to everybody to have a higher state of health and well-being. And even if you're one of those people with chronic illness, these simple concepts, maybe complex concepts, but simple ideas that we finish with are key things that you're going to need to do if you want to get healthy and maintain a higher level of health.
I
All
agree. I
right.
mean, I'll leave everyone with saying that, energy is everything. So everyone who's dealing with a thyroid issue, it's really to some degree a complex energy problem in your body, and everything needs to harmonize to get you back to the point of where, yes, you don't have the diagnosed thyroid issue being manifested anymore, but it's really bigger picture. It's about getting you healthy. And we in functional medicine have gotten away from the foundational things that are so much more impactful than the latest and greatest anti-inflammatory supplements. So Eric, thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation, explain these things, talk about the things that I'm passionate about, because there's not a lot of other people out there I've met other than yourself who are really putting these things out there for the people who are ready to hear them.
Awesome. All right. We're going to finish on that. You have a great rest of your weekend, and
Thank you,
we'll chat
sir.
soon. All right.
Adios.